Hello, my name is Bruce Thompson, and I've been invited to talk about Dickens and Victorian society in the time of Bleak House. So let's get started. There he is. As you probably know, he was born in the southern part of England, the countryside, but he became the great novelist of London. And in his work, wrote about every major institution in Victorian society. Of course, he also dealt with the major trend in 19th century economic history, which was the Industrial Revolution. And in one of his books, in particular, Hard Times, he wrote about the center of that revolution, which was the northern city of Manchester, which he wrote was a town of machinery and tall chimneys, out of which interminable serpents of smoke trailed themselves forever and never got uncoiled. It had a black canal in it, and a river that ran purple with ill-smelling dye. And vast piles of buildings full of windows were there, trembling and a rattling all day long, and where the pistons of the steam engine worked monotonously up and down like the head of an elephant in a state of melancholy madness. Who writes like that today? As you can see, a lot of air pollution in the 19th century. Another quotation from another novel. Strange engines spun and writhed like tortured creatures, making the ground tremble with their agonies. So elephants and tortured creatures, those are some of the metaphors that he used to describe the Industrial Revolution. The mining of fossil fuels, principally coal, coupled with the mechanization of the textile industry, which multiplied the population of the industrial cities of the North, but also overwhelmed the infrastructure needed to sustain life there. So those cities became population sinkholes, places where deaths occurred faster than births. For the first time in human history, the capturing of a nearly unlimited supply of energy and the development of machines that multiplied productivity by a factor of 100 had created the possibility of eliminating poverty. But instead of eliminating human misery, early industrialization intensified it, meanwhile polluting the air with soot and the rivers with industrial waste. That was the paradox that the great writers of the period, Tocqueville, Dickens, Marx, and Engels, registered with shock and horror and sought to explain. So there's a London slum, all of this poverty in the midst of unprecedented wealth. That was the paradox that got Dickens' imagination, well, that scandalized him and ignited this creative burst in which he wrote so many great novels. So these people who are middle class and are having a drink just after photography was invented would have never have socialized or fraternized with these people. And class is one of the major subjects of the great 19th century novels. Why is that? Because middle class readers sought contact in fiction with social classes they tried to avoid in everyday life. Another reminder how different that society was. It was entirely dependent on horses for transportation and for hauling of goods. Middle class work was managerial and professional often. Those who lacked middle class status worked with their hands in jobs that involved significant amounts of drudgery and dirt. Middle class men socialized in private clubs. Working class men found refuge in public houses or pubs. More women working. All manual work was insecure. Sometimes whole trades, like handloom weaving, became redundant because of the Industrial Revolution. Henry Mayhew, social investigator, believed that only about a third of the laboring classes were fully employed at any given time. Another third were partially employed, and the remaining third were unemployed. And what about London, Dickens's city? It was the largest city in the world, with a population of 2.3 million in the census of 1851. Problem was that the infrastructure of the city could not keep up with the growth of population. There is no novel by Dickens, writes a wonderful critic named Stephen Marcus, in which poverty and homelessness are not represented as central dramatic presences. There's the cover of the Oxford edition of Bleak House with Little Joe the crossing sweeper. Of course, the air was terribly polluted because of the burning of all of that coal. even a century after Bleak House was published, London would experience these terrible smoggy fogs. Cholera killed over 10,000 Londoners in 1853, the year Dickens published Bleak House. And everyone was vulnerable to this horrific disease, which was caused, of course, by bacteria in the water, by sewage in drinking water. So a major achievement, which did take place in Dickens's lifetime, was the creation of a modern sewer system. There it is. And finally, just one more point, and that is the law, which plays such a major role in the novel. Dickens's father was imprisoned because of debt at a prison called the Marshalsea, which put Dickens into a factory at a very early age and traumatized him. When he was 16, he learned shorthand and began working as a court reporter. Unlike his predecessor, the novelist Walter Scott, who revered the law and believed that it had raised the level of civilization in his native Scotland, Dickens's insider's view of the courts left him with a lifetime distaste for the legal profession, and pretty soon for politics as well, because he became a political reporter for one of the most important newspapers of the period, the Morning Chronicle. So the institutions of the law are satirized in the novel. There's a photograph of the great man the year before he published Bleak House. And finally, a conclusion. Again, where his predecessor had probed the relationship between a feudal past and a bourgeois present, Dickens unraveled the hidden connections between the different classes in the metropolis. As class barriers became more impermeable and cities grew at an astonishing pace, great numbers of people were living in near proximity while not even recognizing each other's existence. The novelist's work is in part to bring the other reality to the attention of their readers. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy Bleak House.